the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. At GIPC, we're dedicated to trying to point to the link between the innovative and creative industries, our economic success, job creation, the enrichment that these different industry sectors bring to people's lives, but specifically today to talk about how innovation is really helping us through the COVID-19 crisis. I think most of you know that this really is an all-of-nation approach. We've been fortunate that so far 3 vaccines have made it into the pipeline. GIPC has developed a program to try to highlight how that work has been done literally all across the country in many congressional districts and every single state, and the opportunity for research and development, innovative new developments amongst both the research facilities that are in these various locations throughout the country and industry to bring forward new vaccines, new treatments, and also ways to get those vaccines into the arms of every citizen eventually. I can tell you that IP, intellectual property, also plays a huge role in driving innovative and creative industry sectors. Over 45 million jobs are created in these industries, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce, 38% of our GDP, and well over half of our trade. So today, we have an opportunity to really look into what's happening in Virginia, what's happening in the Congresswoman's district. And it's really a pleasure to be joined by our colleague, Brian Anderson, who is president and CEO of the ChamberRVA. I'd like to ask Brian if he could perhaps share some opening remarks before we introduce the Congresswoman.
Thank you, Frank. It is a pleasure to be here. On behalf of ChamberRVA, we always look forward to partnering with our regional and national partners. The U.S. Chamber is doing such phenomenal work across the business sector, and they're always a great partner for us. You know, here locally, there's a lot going on, and we are very fortunate to have not only Congresswoman Spanberger represent us so well, but also what's happening at VCU and within the pharmaceutical industries that are based here. Biotech and bioscience are very strong industry sectors here for us. So this is a great conversation for us. I want to take away from our Congresswoman, and we'll look forward to the back half of the show where we'll talk to, again, those in the Richmond area who are making things happen. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks so much, Brian. I really want to thank Brian for his leadership, but also all the members of ChamberRVA, and of course, all those folks attending today's event. You know, these events simply would not be possible without collaboration between the U.S. Chamber and our local chamber partners. And I just want to stress what an important role the ChamberRVA does for the local business community, but also to really enhance the quality of life for all Central Virginians.
Thank you, Frank.
With that, again, it's my great honor and privilege to be able to introduce U.S. Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, who I think, as you know, represents Virginia's 7th congressional district. Representative Spanberger began her career. First, she served as a federal agent with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, investigating money laundering and narcotics cases, and then serving as a case officer with the CIA. I can tell you that her time with the Postal Service is of particular interest to a number of our members, and particularly during this time of the COVID crisis, where we see so many counterfeit items being shipped through the mail and unsuspectingly going to folks, whether they're healthcare workers or individuals. I really want to thank the Congresswoman for her service both at the Postal Service and also at the CIA. It really takes an amazingly intelligent, resourceful, and skilled person to do that kind of work. And her contributions to our country are something we should all applaud and express our appreciation for. She now serves in the U.S. House of Representatives on the Committee on Agriculture and also on the Committee on Foreign Affairs, where I'm sure her past experience has really come in handy and provided her with a great deal of insights that she can share with her colleagues. On the Agricultural Committee, she serves as the chair of the Conservation and Forestry Subcommittee, as a member of the Commodity Exchanges, Energy and Credit Subcommittee. And on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, she serves as vice chair of the Europe, Eurasia, Energy and the Environment Subcommittees, and also a member of the Asia, Pacific, and Non-Proliferation Subcommittee. These are tremendously important roles, and it gives the Congresswoman a great opportunity to really weigh in on a number of the issues that impact us globally. The Congresswoman grew up in Henrico County and earned her BA at the University of Virginia. We all know what a great school that is. And her MBA at a dual degree program between Purdue University's Krannert School and the GISMA Business School in Hanover, Germany. She really has a wealth of experience, as I just mentioned. But one of the things we appreciate most about the Congresswoman at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is the fact that she's come to Congress to get the work done on behalf of the people of the United States and her district. We need problem solvers. We need pragmatic leaders. The Congresswoman exemplifies that. And once again, Congresswoman, we know we would not get through this COVID crisis without the great work that Congress has done, not only to support the research and development of vaccines and treatments, but also to address the economic hardship facing our nation and our citizens. Thank you for everything you've done to ensure the well-being of your constituents. And if I could turn to you now, we'd welcome hearing some of your insights and comments before we proceed into some brief question and answers. So Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much. And thank you, Frank, for your kind introduction. And thank you, Brian, for your leadership of ChamberRVA. To all the members on the line, thank you for welcoming me here today. I am always excited to speak with the Chamber, and I especially appreciate your role that you all have played in making Central Virginia a real leader in the biotech industry and in our response to COVID-19. Frank, in your introduction, you mentioned the committees that I serve on, and on the Foreign Affairs Committee, on our Asia subcommittee, we were one of the first committees to have a hearing. Well, we were the first committee to have a hearing more than a year ago about this virus that was spreading through China that could potentially pose a threat to our country. So it's been such a tremendous turn of events, a horrible reality for so many, but there's also bright spots of hope. And certainly as we see vaccine deployments throughout the country, and we see what's happening right here in Central Virginia, I think there is room for us to have hope. I'm thrilled to hear about the exciting research and development that's going on in our district, not only in the medical field, but in the industrial and ag sciences fields as well. And ensuring federal support for that research is one of my highest priorities as the voice of the 7th District in Congress. In my opening remarks, I'd like to touch on how Central Virginia has responded to COVID-19 and how the federal government can support research and innovation in the district and across the country moving forward. So first and foremost, COVID and Central Virginia. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a tremendous challenge to our country's healthcare system and economy. And Central Virginia companies and institutions have played an important role in addressing the challenges of the pandemic. Our first responders, our healthcare workers, our caregivers have shown tremendous grit and determination as they come to work day after day to fight to keep their patients healthy. And I've had countless conversations with small business owners about the investments they've made to keep their employees safe, to keep their customers safe, and to keep our community and our economy going. I'm proud that Central Virginia companies are leaders in the historic vaccination drive that's underway right now. And at the federal level, I am very pleased that the federal government has recognized McKesson's incomparable experience in vaccine distribution and recruited them to distribute hundreds of millions of doses of essential supplies for the effort. Additionally, GlaxoSmithKline has partnered with BARDA and Sanofi to develop and manufacture its own COVID-19 vaccine, and more help is on the way. President Biden's American Rescue Plan, which we've passed in the House and is now in the process of working out some differences in the Senate, would provide billions of dollars to support the purchase of vaccines, treatments, PPE, equipment, and other resources necessary for the ongoing COVID-19 response. I voted for that legislation last week, and again, we'll see as it works its way through the Senate. We're expecting to vote on a final reconciliation package next week. To address issues of supply chain and what we're seeing in Central Virginia, the COVID-19 outbreak has shown how vulnerable foreign sourcing of essential medicines and the ingredients used to manufacture them have made our pharmaceutical supply chain during this public health emergency. And so there's a lot of conversations among my colleagues, particularly those of us with a national security background, about some of the supply chain issues that we have experienced over the past year. Of course, issues related to PPE and the availability of masks and gowns, as well as ventilators, were part of the large, very public conversation that we had at the beginning of the pandemic, but really understanding and recognizing the vulnerabilities that we have as it relates to the pharmaceutical supply chain is incredibly important for us to focus on and really take action. Years of underinvestment in the supply chain have made our country dependent on foreign suppliers for essential medicines like penicillin. And we saw last spring how vulnerable our health system is if foreign suppliers shut down, if exports and imports become difficult. And this is a major, major issue. As many healthcare providers know, shortages of essential medicines have been a regular occurrence in our healthcare system, and routine shortages harm patient care and are a great source of frustration for pharmacists and physicians on the front lines, even outside of a global pandemic. And to address this issue, I was thrilled earlier this year when BARDA recognized that Flow VCU and their Central Virginia partners are at the forefront of securing a domestic supply of essential generic medications, precursor materials, and active pharmaceutical ingredients to fight COVID-19 and prevent drug shortages from occurring in the future. The Flow contract and development of advanced manufacturing techniques have the potential to galvanize the creation of an exciting new pharmaceutical manufacturing industry right here in Central Virginia, creating thousands of new jobs, attracting potentially billions in economic investment. And last month I toured VCU and Flow's Medicine for All lab, and I was fascinated by some of the cutting edge technology that Dr. Gupton so kindly showed me on our tour. This week, I was really encouraged when the president recognized the steps forward that we continue to need to make as a country. And I was encouraged that he ordered federal agencies to conduct a review of the risks related to supply chains that are essential for our national defense, especially for pharmaceutical and active pharmaceutical ingredients he called out by name. Last year, I backed 2 bipartisan bills to strengthen the capacity and security of the U.S. pharmaceutical supply chain by investing in research into advanced manufacturing techniques and encouraging long-term procurement contracts. And currently, I'm working to introduce legislation that would create a national stockpile of active pharmaceutical ingredients to prevent shortages and improve domestic manufacturing capacity. I look forward to working with all of your members to discuss how we can continue to build on these exciting federal investments, as well as build a workforce to meet the hiring needs of this rapidly expanding manufacturing center that we are building here in Central Virginia. So outside of the COVID-19 space, I will continue to be a strong advocate for federal research dollars and the promise of discovering new cures, particularly as the pandemic continues and we see variations in the strain of COVID-19 impacting our country and the world. And the proximity of the federal government and NIH has been a real boon for Virginia's innovating companies and research universities. And I will continue to be a strong supporter of federal support to valuable research at the NIH. I was proud to help introduce the Biomedical Innovation Expansion Act of 2019 that invested $10 billion in the NIH innovation projects, which include the Precision Medicine Initiatives and the Brain Initiative. These investments will lead to innovative, precise treatments for patients, improving the lives of millions of people, and increasing the quality and efficiency of our healthcare system. I appreciate all of your thoughts on how my office and Congress can continue to support progress on these fronts. I really appreciate you inviting me here today, and I look forward to the conversation. So thank you again for the invitation to join you all.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman, for sharing those insights. We responded to this crisis understanding that industry alone, of course, was not going to solve this problem, and that we had to all work together. And certainly the government has played a huge role doing foundational research and partnering with industry. It's been one of the most collaborative efforts in our history. And the fact that we have 3 vaccines actually getting into people's arms, in just under a year is truly remarkable. So in response to this, the Chamber developed a program called Discover and Deliver. We have an interactive map which breaks down where clinical trials are taking place by congressional district. It currently lists 59 clinical trials for COVID-19 related therapeutics and vaccines taking place all across Virginia, with 8 taking place in your own congressional district. To note, the leading therapeutic from Gilead, remdesivir, and one of the groundbreaking vaccines by Pfizer have been included in these trials in your own district. Can you tell us why you believe it's important to run these cutting-edge clinical trials in your district and the benefits that these trials bring to your constituents and also COVID-19 patients?
So overall, clinical trials are essential to determine how cutting-edge technologies can translate into actual treatments for diseases or other health conditions. And I'm very excited that we have clinical trials occurring here in Central Virginia. And why is that? Well, one, I'm so excited that we get to be part of the solution and finding cures, finding treatments into the future, but also Central Virginia has a very diverse population that makes our region pretty well suited for effective clinical trials. Research institutions provide care to people from a variety of demographics, age, gender, race, socioeconomic challenges, rural, urban, suburban communities. And so therefore, we have the ability to bring in a very diverse population into clinical trials. So that's a benefit just of our geography and who lives in our community. And this is a benefit from a scientific perspective, but there's also great value from a social justice standpoint. So scientifically, of course, different populations respond differently to drugs. And I think there's no doubt that the more diverse your group of participants, the better your outcomes for being able to really test treatments or medication. And from a social justice perspective, many Black Americans are not necessarily receiving the latest treatments in clinical trials due to, at times, clinically irrelevant inclusion criteria. So ensuring a broad base of those who participate in the trials ultimately is also very, very helpful for our ability for medical providers to provide good care to individuals and a broad American population. Last year, one final thought, I was really proud to work with the NIH and the Appropriations Committee to include report language in the December government funding write-up that recognizes the unique value of Central Virginia's very diverse population and its value in contributing to medical research.
Well, thank you for that. I think the diversity issue is one that the Chamber is very pleased to be partnering with a wide range of groups to try to address. Underserved communities, communities that have historically not had access to vaccines or even to the clinical trials.
Or have had very negative experiences as well. Right.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a tremendously important point because it creates the hesitancy for folks to engage in not only the trials, but also in taking the vaccine. So the Chamber has an equality of opportunity initiative, and we're committed to trying to work through industry and through government to try to really address this critical disparity that you mentioned. So thank you for your work on that. That's a tremendously important part. We really have to, as we've talked about in the title of the All of Nation approach, include everyone in this response. And if we're not, we're just not going to get through this crisis. It's great to hear your comments earlier about how the innovation ecosystem is really thriving in your own district. We're going to hear in a few minutes from some of the players from your academic and biotech communities who've led the way in response to COVID-19 in VA-7, but also across the innovative community. Many folks have recognized the important role that intellectual property, a strong intellectual property system, plays in fostering the research and development of new tests, therapeutics, and vaccines, but also in bringing it from the research to the market. So can you tell us about ways that you believe IP has helped sustain the investment in R&D in your district?
Well, and absolutely. And this is something that I've specifically heard about from those who are coming to our district or those who are in our district or adjacent. Intellectual property protections are important to encourage biotech research, particularly in the development of new cures. And I'm really proud that there's so much research happening in Central Virginia. And in my remarks, I mentioned legislation to fund NIH innovation initiatives like precision medicine and the Cancer Moonshot. And just outside my district, there's 2 NCI designated cancer facilities at UVA and also at VCU. Both are nearby, so I sometimes like to claim them. But the tremendous work that they're doing is so valuable in using advanced diagnostic tools. Researchers at these facilities have really developed cutting edge ways to give patients personalized treatment options for their cancers, as an example. And In the private sector, to kind of get at your question, intellectual property protections have encouraged innovations from constituent companies in medically assisted treatment for opioid addiction, for example. And even as the opioid epidemic worsens, only about 20% of patients with opioid use disorder receive medically assisted treatment. And I'm encouraged by our in-district innovation to improve on this unfortunate statistic. There's certainly a lot of conversation about some of the anti-competitive behaviors that have allowed for price increases. And I think that there's a tremendous need for honest conversations and transparency in pricing. But I do think that there's considerable space for us to really ensure that we're protecting consumers and payers from anti-competitive behavior without infringing on the intellectual property rights that do encourage the exciting innovation that we're seeing here in Central Virginia. And so I think this question's a valuable one, because even recognizing the importance of intellectual property is so, and the role that it plays to exciting people to be on the front lines of new research is an important element of it.
Well, thank you for that. I know small businesses are important to you and to your district, and also to the entire country, as job creation, and also bring forward some of the very innovation that's getting us through the crisis. And small businesses account for 3/4 of all the new jobs in this country, as you well know, and really embody the spirit of innovation, entrepreneurship, and individual initiative for which America is known. You recently introduced some bipartisan legislation getting Americans safely back to work to establish a new grant program to help small businesses and essential employers acquire the PPE, the personal protective equipment that's necessary so that folks will be able to work safely. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about how innovative therapeutics that are developed both by small businesses and also are going to be responsible for putting our communities on the path back to return to work and health, and the role that small business plays? Many people think that these vaccines came forward from big pharma companies like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, when the reality is a lot of the innovative work was done in collaboration with small innovative companies that then license their work to these large corporations. So can you talk a bit about that, Congresswoman?
Sure. And firstly, you mentioned my Getting Americans Safely Back to Work Act, which I'm very proud of. Bipartisan bill meant to help small businesses get the materials, the PPE, the masks, the changes they might have to make to their business space in order to make it safe for their employees and also safe for their customers. And so that's the reactive piece, right? Where we still have the threat of the virus in our community, and we need to be able to make some certain changes, ensure that people have the PPE necessary. And so I'm proud to be kind of in that reactive space, working to ensure small businesses have what they need. But the reality is that the biggest thing that we can do to help small businesses, or frankly, businesses of any size, our community, our kids in school, our medical professionals, and the community in totality, is to ensure that we are going head to head against this virus. And we've seen tremendous work in this space. And it requires investments in vaccines, testing, PPE, and therapeutics for those who are sick and recovering from COVID. And so, notably, the American Rescue Plan, which is the bill that's still making its way through Congress, includes billions of dollars in investments in these areas, including funding for states' vaccine distribution efforts, accelerated production in therapeutics, and investments in lab testing. And what you mentioned in your question about, who came to the table to be part of this Herculean effort, it really goes back months and months, where the federal government was making tremendous investments in vaccine research across the country. There was, in tandem, multiple efforts to really try and fight as a country within the scientific community to be able to fight this pandemic. We saw the accelerated processing of vaccines through the approval process. And kind of the piece there that I think is always important to note is that, typically you wouldn't, put multiple vaccines through, trials at the same time. The process would be just a little bit drawn out, but because of this all of community, all of government, all of scientific community approach, we were able to see in a truly record time 3 at this point vaccines approved to address COVID-19, as well as another one that might be eking towards approval. And so while the some of the most promising treatments, and kind of going on the treatment side for COVID-19, are monoclonal antibody treatments, and that's been proven to prevent COVID-19 hospitalizations and infections if administered quickly after a test. So we talk a lot about the vaccines because, of course, that's the truly ideally preventative side of things. But from a treatment standpoint, even within the past year, the innovations that have occurred in how we contend with the virus, cut down on hospitalizations, which of course, across the board ensures that hospitals aren't getting overloaded, as we saw in various places throughout the country at the beginning of the pandemic. And while the federal government is distributing antibody therapies free of charge, notably there's a loophole in the CARES Act that does expose patients to thousands of dollars of cost sharing out of pocket for the cost of infusing these life-saving drugs. And so one of the approaches that I've taken is to introduce bipartisan legislation to ensure that monoclonal antibody therapies, that were brought up in response to COVID-19 are accessible to every American. And my personal assessment is that when we are in the place of really seeking access to life-saving drugs, particularly in a pandemic, the last thing that a patient should be concerned about is how they're going to pay for those medications that will not only save their lives but also impact whether there's hospital overcrowding and over-resourcing.
Yeah, these are very complex issues, and the vaccines are certainly not the only thing that are going to get us through this. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. You've certainly understood the important role that international trade plays in our overall U.S. economy, but also how important it is to Central Virginia's economy. What role do you think trade policy can play in reinvigorating the U.S. economy, bolstering our ongoing response to the global pandemic, and helping people in Central Virginia?
So a tremendous one. And in fact, Frank, there's one adjustment that I guess we're going to have to make in some of the background information we send out, because I am now in this Congress serving on another subcommittee for the Agriculture Committee. That's the Livestock and International Trade. And in fact, for those who might be questioning whether or not livestock and international trade go together, for the Ag Committee, I would say that Central Virginia's cows, and particularly our calves, are very, very in high demand in Canada. Which is a point of pride for some of the cow-calf operators throughout Central Virginia. And also as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, this is a primary area of focus for me. In 2019, I was proud to be among the very vocal Democrats working with other Democrats and Republicans to pass USMCA. I had multiple roundtables along the way, and some supported and helped by some of our various local chambers to sit down and talk to business owners in Central Virginia, small business owners predominantly, to talk about what USMCA would mean to them. And so as we were working through that process to get USMCA ultimately, or the implementing documents, passed in Congress, I was able to sit down at the White House with the Vice President and a small group of people to talk through what were some of the final hiccups as we were going through that negotiation process. And ultimately, we brought hundreds of members of Congress on board. It was signed into law at this point, January of last year, after it passed the Senate. And I was really excited to see this this agreement move forward, because I know it's important to our Virginia economy. According to USTR, Virginia exports $4.3 billion worth of goods to Canada and Mexico, and those are 2018 numbers, right? But that scope of $4.3 billion worth of goods that we export, this is vital to our economy. It's vital to the businesses that are participating, as the ones pushing goods outbound. And in particular, Virginia's small and medium-sized businesses account for 66% of our Commonwealth exports of transportation equipment to Canada and Mexico, as well as 61% of our food exports to these countries. So the USMCA and agreements like it do provide real tangible benefits to local Virginia-based job creators. And working with my colleagues from across the country, they all have similar stories to tell. I do think that Congress must reassert its authority over trade. This has been a challenge. There's been many places, authorization of use of military force, and other places where Congress has stepped back from asserting its constitutional authority. But recognizing the value of a congressional voice and advocating for Central Virginia, as I do, is why I've co-sponsored the Bicameral Congressional Trade Authority Act and the Trade Security Act and the Reclaiming Congressional Trade Authority Act. And so all of these bills would reassert congressional authority over tariffs and allow congressional representatives of the people and districts we represent and businesses to have the constitutionally required seat at the table when looking at how tariffs and trade policy does in fact impact the people that we represent.
Well, thank you for that. Final question, and we really so appreciate you being so generous with your time. I just want to go back to the issue of folks actually taking the vaccine. Recent polling has shown 47% of Americans are still hesitant to receive a COVID-19 vaccine. What do you think, and this is particularly true for minority communities, what can the business community and also the government do in your mind to help assure the public the vaccine is safe and effective so we can have a lot more folks getting those shots?
This is a hard question. I think that, first and foremost, anybody who has any level of a voice or influence, be it because of the position they hold, the job they hold, the volunteer work that they have, the friends and family within their community, that they use that voice to really explain to people why the vaccine is important, why we can trust the science behind it. I think those who might have particular influence, and we've seen, that I'll mention VCU as an example. When VCU started rolling out its vaccines, they did so very, very publicly, which is a day of celebration. But I think there was strong intent in having, physicians and nurses and custodial staff and people from different departments getting that vaccine on camera, so that the American people, or at least folks within the local Virginia media market, could see that there's a trust in the science. I think there's a variety of different questions about what's the purpose of the vaccine, right? The purpose is to prevent illness. The purpose is to keep oneself safe and also everyone around them. And notably that all of the vaccines, now there's 3 different types. So there's a level of nervousness about this vaccine versus that vaccine, and they're all safe, they're all important, they're all great options. And I'll let the others speak to this a bit more, but one requires a type of cold storage, the other one doesn't. So there's differences that can be really impactful if you're the logistics person charged with getting them to various different places. But from a personal standpoint, they're all unbelievably valuable in preventing hospitalizations and preventing death. And so it's so incredibly important that we continue to be vocal with our confidence. And for people who do have questions, there's a lot of great resources out there. And notably, once we're talking about the hesitancy issue and trying to affirm and be very vocal and clear in why we trust the science, why the vaccines are good, pointing to people who are leaders and business leaders and religious leaders and community leaders who have gotten the vaccine and the value that it has there. I think it's also valuable for us to then kind of point our attention to what's happening at the state level and what's happening at the national level. Certainly within the rescue plan, we've allocated billions of dollars for vaccine rollout. And this is essential for an ongoing national strategy to ensure that the vaccine can reach every corner of the country. And so, we've seen in recent weeks that the number of people who are reporting vaccine hesitancy continues to go down. And we need to continue to push on this, make sure people are educated, make sure people know where they can get a vaccine, how they can get it. And And, I just at this point like to say that our local health districts have been doing tremendous, tremendous work. I think that apart from the fact that there are, there has been so much changing information about the pandemic, about COVID-19. That's what I've been hearing from constituents. That's what I've been hearing from health workers, that, what we knew about COVID-19 in March of last year is very different from what we knew in August. It's very different from what we knew in December. And so, recognizing that the flow of information about the pandemic was evolving, I think that has been also part of the concern related, or the hesitancy that people have had with the vaccine, because they're at this point accustomed to information evolving. But in fact, we know these vaccines are safe. We know they're valuable to preventing hospitalizations and saving people's lives. And I think that the more we continue to see just outreach in the community and people being very public, posting on social media when they've gotten their vaccines, that will continue to move in the right direction. But frankly, it's many of our community health department workers who are doing tremendous, tremendous outreach to make sure that we're overcoming some of those hurdles, sensitive to them, but ultimately working to overcome them.
Well, Congresswoman, it's been so helpful to hear your thoughts and your keen insight. Before we let you go, and I turn it over to Brian and the panel, I just want to give you the final word. If there's anything last moment you'd like to share with us before you have to go back to your very busy schedule. But this has been terrific, and thank you so much. We look forward to continued partnership. I'll give you the final word.
Again, Frank, thank you for the invitation. Brian, thank you for all your great work. The rest of the panel I know is going to be a tremendous conversation, and to all of the business owners and community leaders on the call, thank you for inviting me to participate. And I'm just so proud of what we're doing in Central Virginia. I look forward to seeing it continue quite some time into the future.
Thanks again, Congresswoman. Stay safe, and thanks also to your great team for all their great work. I'd now like to turn it back over to my colleague, Brian Anderson, who's going to lead a fascinating panel discussion. Brian, all you.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you also, Congresswoman. You represent us very well, and we're thankful for all the hard work you're doing. I do have the pleasure of moderating a panel of some really terrific people here in our region. I'm going to introduce them very briefly. Dr. ChamberRVA is the Vice President of Research and Innovation for Virginia Commonwealth University. Dr. Frank Gupton serves as the Junior Chair for Pharmaceutical Engineering, the Chair and Professor for Department of Chemical and Life Science Engineering at Virginia Commonwealth University, and Robbie Demaria, Chief of Staff for the Flow Corporation. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. And I know we have a lot we could spend all day on, but let's give a taste of what's happening in our region and really the phenomenal work that you all are doing. So I'm going to pose a couple of questions, and certainly want you guys to add in where you need to. I have questions for each one of you, but also want to make sure you can make this engaging and feed off each other as we go through this. So we'll start with you, Dr. Rao. It's been almost a year since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. It's hard to believe in just that amount of short of time, which a year is not usually a short amount of time, but the work you do, it really is a short amount of time. But you all and many others have been really focused on this from day one and working toward making sure that we've got multiple effective therapeutics and vaccines to combat it. And now we're starting to see the fruition of that. So can you tell us how VCU rapidly responded to help us identify some treatments early in the pandemic?
Yeah, first of all, Brian, thank you, and Frank Cullen and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for this kind invitation to be on this panel. It's really, as Congresswoman was saying, hard to imagine how quickly a year has gone by and this pandemic seemingly has changed our lives forever, not to speak of the countless suffering and the ongoing deaths. And you're right, and the Congresswoman so nicely stated just how effectively these therapies and vaccines have been developed at an amazing speed. And I think we need to keep in mind that all this has been truly science-driven without cutting corners. And we also need to remind ourselves that this was not done in vacuum, and we didn't start from scratch, but was really built on the strength of so much that was ongoing in the area of therapeutic and vaccine research in our country, in our universities, including coronavirus research that was ongoing. So again, while industry, both big pharma and small biotechs and our government have played a phenomenal role, Academia has also played an important role, especially I would say at regional levels in the fight against this pandemic. So if you look at VCU, we are an urban research university. And when I say VCU, I mean the entire VCU Health Hospital system. We take pride in the fact that we are relatively nimble. And we have an established culture of collaboration and innovation. And this is actually what has resulted in VCU being able to pivot and quickly activate so many of these trials of potential therapies to our patients, especially early on in the pandemic. But all of this happened because we were able to bring the right kind of people and the talent and to create the systems and processes that were necessary. I'll just illustrate a few examples. We had to put together a clinical trial oversight group to evaluate the various clinical trial opportunities that were there and determine which studies were best fit for our patients in our community. We had to put an activation team, a COVID activation team, to fast track all pandemic response trials, resulting in these investigational therapies being available to our sickest of patients in matter of days, rather than the usual 2 to 3 months or whatever it takes. And this includes the remdesivir trial we were talking. We really had to expand on our FDA consultation teams to support the emergency use authorization submissions that we had to do to the FDA, including our own faculty-led submissions of drugs and biologics. In addition to therapeutics, Brian, I think we had to create processes where we could sterilize these N95 masks and other personal protection equipment that, as you recall, were in such a short supply so that they were available to our healthcare workers. And actually, it's been tremendous that it's not only something that we helped our own healthcare workers, but we were able to share these processes with other hospital systems in our community and beyond. And they developed these face shields that they were using in the dental clinics. So all of this happened in such a short time span. I think the other piece to remember is while we looked at the early phase, VCU continues to look at novel approaches to look at the long-term impact of the COVID-19 infection. And our VCU Health is establishing these clinics to see how treating these patients who are having long-term effects, what have we learned from them and how best can we bring them back to health? On the commercial arena, as the Congresswoman was saying, we've created these innovation centers that we have where license framework has been made easy, and we have actually developed mechanisms where at a time like this, instead of haggling over royalties and this and that, we are freely providing non-exclusive royalty-free license IPs and sharing them with each other. So I would say, and during the early part, we actually from VCU had 2 COVID-19 therapies that we licensed that are moving along. And finally, I would say the university put recognizing the innovation that goes on in academia, we put hundreds of thousands of dollars in what we call as COVID rapid response funding, research funding, where a number of our investigators, where innovative ideas and projects that we thought could be helpful in addressing the needs during this pandemic and, God forbid, future outbreaks. I'll give an example, such as a drug patch outfitted with microneedles to facilitate mass distribution and self-administration, say for drugs or even the vaccine across the country and beyond. These are all examples, Brian, of things that VCU was doing during the early phase and even through now. And there's so much fascinating work going on in therapeutic area that my colleague Frank Gupton would frankly share in that space, and I'll let him articulate that part.
Thank you, Dr. Rell. I think one thing that came through your comments and certainly what I've learned in my time here is none of this would have been possible if it wasn't for the great work y'all been doing for a lot of years. And you had the foundation in place, you've got the expertise, you've got the faculty, you were already doing things that enabled you to pivot into doing something very needed at a time that our nation needed you the most. So thank you for that. So switching now to you, Dr. Gupton, again, you've been doing this a long time, and I appreciated learning about your history in our pre-call. You know, the therapeutics and vaccines that, you know, have been developed to help us with COVID-19, you have come along at a pretty unprecedented pace. And part of that is because we've also had unprecedented public-private partnerships come together to make some things happen. So can you tell us how, you work with the private sector and organizations like the Gates Foundation and the VCU system to make sure we could do things to respond to this pandemic? You're on mute, sir. Here we go.
Brian, thanks again for the opportunity to talk to you all about the collective work that we're doing here at VCU. I guess what Sri Ram was saying earlier is what it all boils down to is this has really been a team sport. It's taken a collective sort of resources to be able to address these issues on several different levels. I'll talk to you a little bit about what we're doing, and part of it kind of reflects upon Sri Ram's partnership with us. Back last March, we were basically shut down in our laboratories. Everybody was locked down, and we were trying to practice social distancing. I got a call from the Gates Foundation. I've been working with the Gates Foundation for probably about 5 years on working on developing lower cost methods to produce HIV drugs. And they approached me with a problem that they were having with regards to one of the COVID-19 drugs that was in development, remdesivir. And Bill Gates had a discussion with part of the leadership at Gilead about the supply chain. And one of the things we've been working on a lot is this whole supply chain issue with flow. And what they found out was that they couldn't get the starting material to produce the drug. And so the Gates Foundation asked us if we would go back and take a look and see if we could figure out a way to make that starting material in a way that could be produced on a large scale commercially and cost effectively. I called Sri Ram, we talked about it. He opened up our labs for us, gave us permission to get started. And in a period of about 4 to 6 weeks, we developed an entirely new process to make that key starting material. From there, they asked us to look at a second drug that we think is kind of going to be the one that's going to maybe the winner in the marketplace. It was a drug recently developed by, licensed in by Merck. And the difference between remdesivir and this other drug is that remdesivir has to be given by IV. The other drug, it can be given orally, so it doesn't create the strain and stress on the hospital system. And we were asked to develop an entire process to make that drug. And we did that in another 4 to 6 weeks. And so this is kind of the thing that I'm most proud of with our students and our cohorts here at VCU. Getting back to Sri Ram's point about being able to pivot and respond to opportunities quickly, those are two really great examples of what we've been able to do to advance some of the therapeutics that are going to be needed to treat the patients that have been infected.
As I learned in our pre-call, I'm certainly glad that you're back in the game, and I appreciate you offering those comments. Robbie, welcome. And we haven't had a chance to meet before today, but we are so glad that you're here with us today. But also, we're glad that Flow is in our region. Really, the cutting edge work that you all are doing. A lot of people, when they think about biopharmaceutical innovation, they think of the ones you hear that've been around a long time, have the big names, and they also, but it takes a whole range of organizations to come together to have these type of technological breakthroughs. Large companies, startups like Flow, to the university partners, all of those have to come together. So tell us a little bit about what Flow's doing as you guys work to respond to COVID-19 within our Richmond region. And welcome to the region, by the way.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brian. And thanks for having me on this panel. It's always great to be with my colleagues, Dr. Gupton and Dr. Rao. Really enjoy working with them and being here. As you noted, though, in those introductions, both of them have doctor in front of their names. I do not. So I'm going to leave the science to them, and I'll stick to the business side of things. So, Brian, I think to answer your question specifically about how Flow is responding to the pandemic is really to understand our mission and then our company formation in the result of the contract. So, our mission is to reliably supply high quality, affordable essential medicines using US-based advanced manufacturing. Those US-based advanced manufacturing processes are coming from Dr. Gupton, another co-founder of Flow. And at our early days of our company formation, we were really going to be specifically focusing on shortages in pediatrics. And it wasn't until the pandemic started to really take hold here in the US that we were able to have some conversations with the government and say, listen, half the medications that we're looking to manufacture for pediatrics are the same medications that are being used for hospitalized patients with COVID-19. In particular, we all know at the onset, we went and looked for a number of ventilators. Well, medications to put patients on ventilators had been on shortage for a while. So if you don't have the medications to be able to put patients on ventilators, there's really no point in having those. Those early conversations is what led to our contract in May. And our contract does really three things. The first was to procure and manufacture, again, those essential medicines needed for hospitalized patients with COVID-19. We did that and we're doing that. The second was to rebuild the supply chain from end to end here in the United States for resiliency purposes. We're not opposed to a global supply chain, but as Dr. Gupton was mentioning, having the key starter material, the API, and the finished dosages all here for times of a pandemic, a natural disaster, or a trade war is really important for American citizens. And then the third and final part of the contract is related to the SAPR, the Strategic Active Pharmaceutical Ingredient Reserve, which is mimicked off of the Petroleum Reserve. Right now, we have a little bit of a broken system when it comes to the Strategic National Stockpile. We send finished dosages to the SNS, which take up a significant amount of room. They tend to have a shelf life of maybe a year or two at most. By storing these essential medicines in their API form, we again can increase quality. It takes up less room, and it is significantly less for the federal government. And then send those to a fill finish facility 30, 45 days after when we know that they're needed. So those are sort of the three things that we're doing. All that's happening right here in the Richmond region between the great work that Dr. Gupton and Dr. Rao are doing in Richmond, all the way down to our facility and partners in Petersburg. We have Ampac Fine Chemicals, ourselves, and then Civica RX, the largest nonprofit fill finish manufacturer in the country.
Again, we're glad you're here, Robbie, not just you personally, but your team. And we're looking forward to the great things you guys are going to continue to do. We're going to run out of time, obviously, just we never have enough. So I want us to promise we'll come back and do this conversation again soon, specifically just around what you all are doing. I do think we should end, Dr. Rao, with one question that comes up a lot, and that's around how the pandemic has affected our people of color. More so than the general population. And I know you at VCU are doing a lot of work to work on this. So in a couple of minutes, can you tell us what you're doing to help us make sure that, again, from an equity standpoint, we're also making sure we can take care from a treatment and a vaccination standpoint, helping our Black and brown communities the way we need to?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but I just wanted to touch base on what Robbie just mentioned and what Frank was talking earlier. This is a perfect example of partnership, a public-private partnership for a greater good. And in addition to everything that they were talking about, the supply chain and manufacturing of drugs, what a tremendous opportunity for an educational training, for development of workforce in the community. And the ripple effect of what is happening here is going to have a phenomenal impact on the community, with other businesses developing and building on this. So to your point, it's a conversation for another day, and I'd happy to join you and others in that conversation. But to your point about disparities, I mean, frankly, I would say this year-long fight against COVID virus has clearly illuminated or illustrated our ongoing health disparities in communities of color. Now, Frank in his comments said this, and the Congresswoman also stated, the skepticism about the therapeutics or vaccines is actually quite broad. And there was a recent poll that I just read a few days ago where it says 1 in 3 Americans are expressing hesitation in getting the vaccine. I mean, this is a serious concern. But to your point, this is actually quite widespread in communities of color. But if you look at that segment, the reasons are actually multifactorial, right? It includes lack of access to affordable care, racism, socioeconomic, lack of inclusion in trials that they've had in the past, and many other issues that have frankly resulted in challenges to good health. So we as a society, I think, it's incumbent on us that we address these health disparities in our communities. And it's really critical to our future. And VCU is focusing quite a bit in this area, whether it's our VCU Center for Health Disparities, where they're looking at outcomes for supporting these kinds of calls to action, or the communication that's coming out of our leaders from VCU Health, including people like our director for the Massey Cancer Center, Dr. Nguyen, who has recently joined VCU. And I'll just illustrate a little bit of what he does and how VCU is leading the way in addressing some of these health disparities and how we are trying to influence change, especially with treatments. So Dr. Nguyen, who, by the way, for those who don't know, is the only African-American director of an NCI designated cancer center in the country, and we are so fortunate to have him here. He brought his passion for community, particularly the underserved communities, with him. So in spite of COVID, he's been out there in Richmond's Black communities as a health educator, as a champion for health equity. It's this kind of engagement with community that's opening up doors to build trust and supporting open discussions about COVID-19, the risk factors that are affecting these kinds of populations, our minority populations, and the vaccine. So he has appeared, he regularly comes on radio, and others do. So with so many concerns of our minority communities, Dr. Nguyen and several of these Black pastors, they established a weekly forum to discuss science and air all these concerns that the parishioners have. He and our other faculty, I would say like Dr. Behrman, appear on media to emphasize how safe these vaccines are. And I would say some of these efforts led by Dr. Nguyen and others at VCU was what resulted in Dr. Anthony Fauci, US President's chief medical advisor, coming to VCU virtually, of course, and speaking to the VCU community, our religious leaders in Richmond, and the public. I think there were about 10,000 people on that, including our minorities, and where he went through and explaining how science and scientific rigor and testing and evaluations actually led to and the approval of these vaccines, and why people of color who are most impacted should not be concerned and should actually sign up. We're also looking at just a minor point, but an important one. We have researchers at VCU like Janine Guidry, who are looking at what is happening on the social media about concerns, the rumors, the facts that they share. And she's doing these surveys to understand Virginian attitudes about getting vaccines and about the safety. So when so many people are using social media platforms to express themselves, I think we need to better understand how to trust information, where is accurate information coming and inaccurate information is being spread. And so lead ways to dispel these falsehoods. And that's what our faculty are doing. So ultimately, this is a commitment to our community, and we have to build that trust. So I'm hoping with all that we are doing, VDH, the community leaders, business leaders, we can dispel some of these myths, and people in the region, especially our minority communities, will take the vaccine.
Thank you for that. And I know that from President Rao all the way throughout the organization at VCU, you all are very focused on these inequities and how we can help our different populations better. Dr. Gupta, I know we didn't get to talking about how you're doing a lot of work around lowering manufacturing costs, and then certainly, Robbie, some things you all are doing around the inefficiencies within the development process and how we can bring that faster. So I really would like to have a follow-on session later on, because I think you can bring your partners, Robbie, that y'all have worked with in the region, along with, again, Dr. Rao and Dr. Gupton, to really make this a even deeper conversation. So thank you for your time today, and really for all that you're doing to help us all remain safe during COVID, and to hopefully prevent getting COVID, and then what you'll do on other diseases as we go forward. Frank, we're getting close to our time.
We are, and I want to thank the panelists for sharing their insights. You know, it really highlights what's going on throughout the country, but particularly in Central Virginia, to get us through this crisis. As we title these all of nation response events, in different regions, it really does exemplify the fact that we're all in this together, and it's going to require a combined effort to really get us past this crisis and back to some degree of what was a more normal way of not only doing business, but just living our daily lives. I can't thank Brian and his team at Chamber RVA enough for everything they've done to make today's event a success. And of course, I really want to thank our special guest, Congresswoman Spanberger, for sharing her insights and thoughts, but also for her leadership and commitment to working on behalf of the people in Virginia's 7th District and our entire country. Brian, thank you again for the partnership. You said it best. We need to have many, many more discussions around these important issues, and we look forward to the Chamber to partnering with our colleagues at the local level to try to really address these issues that are critically important for our country and for your residents. Thank you for your time today. Look forward to future
Thank you, Frank.
collaborations.
Thank you.
Thank you.